Welcome to Pillowtime Lore, a quiet little haven where the world slows down and stories come to life just as the night settles in. Maybe you remember being a child, curled up under a soft blanket while your mom or dad sat beside you, their voice gentle and soothing. The day's troubles didn't matter then. The only thing that existed was the safety of their words, the warmth of their touch, and the promise that everything would be all right by morning. Perhaps you can still recall the way they'd caress your hair or hum a lullaby as your eyelids grew heavy. Those moments stay with us, tucked deep inside our hearts. Even as we grow older, here at Pillowtime Lore, we try to bring that same feeling back, that comforting sense of being cared for, of letting go, of slipping into dreams without a worry in the world. For some of you, today might have been long and exhausting. Maybe it didn't go as planned, or maybe the world just felt a little too loud. That's okay. This is your time now. Think of me as a cozy old grandma, sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, speaking softly as you settle in and let the day melt away. Each story we share is like a soft, warm blanket for the soul, filled with wonder, magic, and peace. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the words carry you to a place where worries can't follow. Welcome to Pillowtime Lore, where every night ends with comfort, and every story feels like home. There are places in this world that seem to hold their breath, places where the air feels thick with memories, and the walls seem to lean in as though they are listening. Houses with windows that watch and hallways that whisper. Ashford Manor was one of those places, a grand estate, standing proud against time. Its gardens wild and beautiful, its rooms rich with history and silence. A home full of laughter, long past and secrets, carefully tucked away. Clara, a young woman with a curious mind and a heart full of wonder, had always loved stories of mystery. She devoured books filled with twists and hidden truths, never imagining that one day she would step into a world that felt like one of those very tales. When an unexpected invitation arrived, summoning her to spend a few weeks at the beautiful Ashford Manor, Clara accepted with excitement and a touch of nervousness. For who among us hasn't longed for an adventure, a chance to step out of the familiar and into the unknown? But what Clara did not know was that this visit would bring her more than just beautiful gardens and cozy fireside evenings. It would test her courage, her imagination, and her heart. And you, dear listener, will walk beside her through grand rooms lit with golden fairy lights, down darkened corridors where shadows seem to whisper through moments of warmth, laughter, and quiet sorrow. For sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not found behind locked doors or in flickering candlelit rooms, but in the people we meet and the stories they carry deep within them. So settle in, let the outside world slip away, and listen closely, for the tale of Clara and Ashford Manor is about to begin. And like all the best stories, it holds secrets you will not want to miss. Clara had always been a quiet soul, tucked away in a little town where the days felt slow and predictable. She found her greatest adventures not in the streets outside her window, but in the pages of her beloved mystery novels, each book like a secret door to another world. She often spent evenings curled up by the small fireplace, her cat purring softly beside her, while she imagined herself in grand houses full of secrets, where whispers traveled down dark corridors and every shadow hid a story waiting to be told. Her life, though simple, was not without its challenges. She had lost her parents when she was young and now lived with her kindly aunt, a gentle woman who always encouraged Clara's vivid imagination. Yet Clara often longed for something more, something extraordinary, a break from the sameness of her quiet life. Deep down, she believed that every person's story held a moment of adventure, a twist in the plot, waiting to surprise them. And she often wondered when hers would come, one chilly afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the lace curtains. A letter arrived, sealed with a delicate crest. Clara opened it with trembling hands and read aloud, her voice quivering with excitement. Lady Meredith, a distant family friend whom Clara had only met once as a child, was inviting her to spend a few weeks at Ashford Manor, the grand estate where her family had lived for generations. Clara's heart leaped. It felt like the kind of invitation she had only read about. Her aunt smiled warmly, though there was a hint of worry in her eyes, as she packed Clara's small trunk with care. A neighbor passing by caught wind of Clara's upcoming journey and leaned close with a teasing whisper, saying that Ashford Manor had a haunted past, that strange things were said to happen there after dark. Clara laughed nervously, brushing off the comment. But in truth, her heart beat faster at the thought as the day of her departure came. Clara wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and stepped into the waiting carriage. The road stretched ahead like an unwritten chapter, and Clara's mind whirled with dreams of secret passageways, locked rooms, and mysterious figures. She could not have known that this visit would change her in ways she could never have imagined. For some journeys, she would later say, are not taken with the feet alone, but with the heart and the imagination. The journey to Ashford Manor was long and winding. The carriage wheels creaked over gravel roads as the misty countryside unfurled like a painting before Clara's wide eyes. She sat pressed against the window, clutching her shawl as the trees grew taller and the air colder. Every bend in the road brought a new thrill to her heart, for she had never been this far from home before. There is a certain kind of excitement, dear one, that comes when life begins to shift, like the first turning of a key in a long, locked door, and Clara felt it in every breath she took that morning. As they rounded a final curve, the manor came into view, rising from the fog like a grand old memory. Its towering stone walls seemed to touch the sky, and sprawling gardens stretched endlessly. Tangled with autumn leaves and climbing ivy, Clara gasped softly, for it was even more magnificent than the worlds she had built in her imagination. The carriage driver glanced at her through the mist, and with a low voice, he said that though Ashford Manor was beautiful, it held shadows within, especially in the west wing. He swore he had seen strange lights flickering there at night, and heard voices when no one was supposed to be inside. Clara's heart quickened, her mind immediately spinning tales of secret passageways and hidden figures. Though she tried to appear calm, she tucked this piece of information away like a clue in one of her mystery books. When they arrived, Lady Meredith herself stepped forward to greet Clara. Her presence was warm and graceful, her voice carrying both strength and sadness. She embraced Clara with genuine affection, Yet when Clara innocently mentioned the West Wing, Lady Meredith's expression flickered, her eyes clouding over as if a shadow had crossed her heart. She quickly changed the subject and led Clara inside. It was there Clara met Edward, Lady Meredith's nephew, whose smile was kind and whose manners were impeccable. Yet there was a certain reserve about him, as if he carried unspoken thoughts like heavy stones. Clara found herself curious about him, wondering what lay behind that calm demeanor. As they walked through the grand halls lined with portraits of stern ancestors and glittering chandeliers, Clara felt a whisper of mystery in the very air, and deep within her she knew that beneath all this elegance, Ashford Manor held a story waiting to be uncovered, one that perhaps only she could bring to light. Clara spent her first day wandering through the great halls of Ashford Manor. Each room seemed to hum with memories of the past. Portraits of stern-looking ancestors watched her from their gilded frames, their eyes almost alive with secrets. There was a kind of magic in the house, the kind that settles into the very walls over centuries. She ran her fingers over the polished wooden railings, breathing in the faint scent of old books, burning firewood, and something else she couldn't quite name, a scent like faded roses and rain-soaked stone. At first, she was enchanted. The dining hall glimmered with crystal chandeliers. The library was stacked high with books she had only dreamed of reading, and the garden outside seemed like a fairy tale come alive. Yet, beneath all this beauty, there was a hush, a quietness that didn't feel entirely natural. Clara began to notice small oddities. A door handle that rattled behind her as she passed the West Wing, faint whispers late at night, like someone holding a hushed conversation just beyond the walls. She would hold her breath, straining to listen, but the voices would vanish as quickly as they came, leaving her heart racing in the dark. The servants were kind, polite, and helpful. Yet, whenever Clara mentioned the West Wing or asked about certain locked rooms, their smiles would falter, their hands would fidget, and they would change the subject with startling speed. She caught a maid glancing nervously toward a shadowy corridor, her lips parting as if to speak, but then she turned away, whispering something under her breath. Clara's curiosity flared like a candle in the wind. She told herself she was simply being observant, but in truth, she felt as though she had been dropped into the pages of one of her beloved novels. Edward remained as charming as ever, always ready with polite conversation. Yet there was a quiet edge to him whenever Clara asked about the house's history or hinted at the West Wing. His answers were smooth but final, a gentle wall built to keep her at bay. Clara knew he was hiding something, and though she tried to be patient, her imagination began to race. She could feel the mystery pressing in on her, whispering to her through the very stones of the manor. And though a part of her was afraid, a larger part was thrilled. For Clara had always believed that every locked door has a key, and every shadow hides a story, waiting for the right soul to find it. The next morning dawned misty and pale, with a soft silver light stretching across the gardens. Edward invited Clara for a walk, saying the gardens were at their loveliest after a night of rain. Clara eagerly agreed, hoping perhaps to learn more about the house and its mysteries. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of wet earth. Gravel crunched beneath their shoes as they strolled past fountains and winding hedges that seemed to twist like secrets themselves. At first, their conversation was light and pleasant. Edward spoke of the different plants his late uncle had imported, of the changing seasons, and of the peaceful life the countryside offered. Clara found him charming, his words smooth and thoughtful. Yet, she could not ignore how his expression would shift whenever the topic of family arose. There was a subtle tightening around his mouth, a flicker of unease in his eyes, as though some memory pressed too close for comfort. Curious, Clara gently steered the conversation toward the West Wing, mentioning how she had admired the architecture of that part of the house. Edward's smile faltered almost imperceptibly, and in an instant he changed the subject, pointing out a patch of rare flowers ahead. Clara's heart gave a little leap, for this was not the first time he had avoided such questions. His voice remained calm, but his steps quickened, as though he were walking away from the past itself. As they continued, Clara began to notice other small things. The way Edward's gaze would sweep over the manor with an unreadable heaviness. The way his laughter seemed just a little too practiced. Clara's mind, well trained by countless novels, began to weave a story of its own. What if Edward was not merely avoiding the topic out of sorrow? What if he was guarding a secret, perhaps even covering up a crime committed within those stone walls? The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She pictured him sneaking through the halls at night, hiding evidence, speaking in whispers with those nervous servants. Her imagination spun elaborate plots filled with betrayal and hidden truths. Clara reminded herself she could not simply accuse him without proof. So she resolved to watch quietly, to observe his every word and gesture. For, as she often read in her mystery books, those who guard secrets are bound to slip, and when they do, the truth rushes out like a flood. Unstoppable and undeniable, Clara only needed to be patient and ready when that moment came. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that seems to listen back at you. Clara could not sleep, her mind restless and buzzing with unanswered questions. She slipped out of her room, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The corridors of Ashford Manor were dimly lit, the flickering lamps casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. She moved carefully, her slippers barely making a sound on the cold stone floor. The house felt different at night, older somehow, as if its very walls were breathing secrets as she wandered. Clara found herself drawn toward the West Wing, the part of the house that seemed to carry its own gravity, pulling her closer with every step. The air grew colder there, the silence deeper, and then, quite suddenly, she saw it. A thin strip of light beneath a locked door, wavering like a candle in the wind. Her heart leaped into her throat. Someone was inside. She pressed herself close and held her breath. Listening, faint footsteps moved within, slow and deliberate, then stopped all at once, leaving only a stillness so deep it felt almost alive. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the brass handle. It was icy cold beneath her fingers. She tried to turn it, but it would not move. Locked tight, she rattled it softly, a desperate attempt to catch whoever might be inside, but there was no answer. Only the echo of her own racing pulse. Just then, a sudden creak behind her made her whirl around. A young servant stood there, pale as moonlight and shaking. his eyes wide with something Clara could only call fear. "Miss Clara, you should not be here," he stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. He took her gently by the arm and urged her away, his hands trembling so badly she could feel it through the fabric of her sleeve. She tried to ask questions, to demand why the West Wing was forbidden, but the servant only shook his head and muttered that it was not safe. Not safe for anyone. Then he all but fled down the corridor, leaving Clara standing alone in the dark. As she returned to her room, Clara's mind spun with wild thoughts. What could make a grown man so afraid? What secret could cause such terror? Her imagination raced to its wildest corners. Perhaps someone was being kept prisoner behind that locked door. Perhaps a family scandal was being hidden away like an ugly scar. The thought both frightened and thrilled her, for Clara had always longed for adventure, and now it seemed the adventure had come to her, wrapped in shadows and whispers. She vowed silently that she would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost her. The days that followed were restless ones for Clara. Each morning she awoke with a heart that felt heavier than the last, as if the very air of Ashford Manor was pressing down upon her. The grand old house that had once seemed enchanting now felt like a labyrinth of unspoken words and hidden grief. Clara found herself watching everything more closely. The way the servants exchanged quick glances when certain topics arose. The way the hallways seemed to grow colder near the West Wing. And the way Edward's mood shifted like the unpredictable wind one misty afternoon as she wandered through a quiet passage seldom used. Clara noticed something strange on the dusty floor. Faint, faded footprints leading straight toward the locked door of the West Wing. They were old, worn as if someone had walked there many times in secret. Her heart gave a sharp flutter. Kneeling, she traced the outline of one with her fingers. They were not recent, yet the sight was enough to send her thoughts spiraling into wild possibilities. It felt like proof that someone did indeed go in and out of that forbidden place. That same evening, Clara awoke to the sound of muffled crying, soft and heartbreaking, following the sound down the darkened corridor. She paused outside Lady Meredith's chambers. The weeping was unmistakable, quiet but full of sorrow. Clara's breath caught. Why would Lady Meredith cry alone in the night, unless there was a grief too heavy to share? Clara backed away silently, her mind racing. Meanwhile, Edward seemed to grow more distant with every passing day, his charming conversation now laced with distraction, his smiles too brief, his eyes carrying shadows that never quite reached the surface. Clara noticed how he avoided certain hallways and never lingered near the West Wing. She began to wonder if the burden he carried was guilt. Her imagination began to weave dramatic pictures. Perhaps Edward had quarreled with a relative, and something terrible had come of it. Perhaps he was protecting the family's honor by burying a dark truth beneath layers of silence. At night, Clara tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The whispers she heard seemed louder now, winding through her dreams and waking thoughts alike. It was as though the manor itself was speaking to her in riddles, urging her to uncover its secrets. Every creak of the floorboards made her pulse race, and every shadow felt like a clue. She was caught between fear and fascination, like a moth circling ever closer to a flame, knowing it might burn but unable to turn away. The evening began with a restless wind whispering through the tall trees surrounding Ashford Manor. By nightfall, that whisper had grown into a wild, roaring storm. Rain lashed against the windows in furious bursts, and the grand old house seemed to tremble with each mighty clap of thunder. The chandeliers swayed ever so slightly, casting nervous shadows on the walls. Clara stood by her window, watching the branches bend and twist, her heart drumming with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Storms had always unsettled her, but tonight it felt different, as though the storm outside was echoing the storm inside her own restless mind. The house groaned beneath the weight of the wind, and certain corridors were plunged into darkness as lamps flickered and went out. Servants hurried about with hurried steps, carrying candles and muttering prayers under their breath. Clara's room felt close and suffocating. Every creak and gust made her nerves tighten. She paced the floor, unable to calm the questions swirling in her mind. She had been circling the truth for days, peering at it through the cracks, and tonight something told her that the answers would finally come. Then, through the half-open door of her chamber, she saw a flicker of light moving quickly down the hall. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was Edward, his face pale and intent, a lantern gripped tightly in his hand. He moved with urgency, his steps sure and fast, and Clara's heart leaped when she saw him turn toward the west wing. All at once, the whispers, the locked door, the servants' trembling hands, they all seemed to collide in her mind like puzzle pieces falling into place. This was her moment, she told herself. She could not turn back now, not when she was so close. Clara slipped out of her room, her own footsteps silent against the thick carpets. The storm's roar masked any sound she might make. Lightning flared through the tall windows, illuminating her path for a heartbeat before plunging everything back into darkness. She followed Edward at a careful distance, her pulse pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. The west wing loomed ahead, the very heart of the mystery. Clara's fingers brushed the cold walls as she crept closer. The storm outside seemed to rage in time with her racing thoughts. Chaos without and chaos within. She was certain she stood on the edge of a terrible discovery, certain that what waited beyond that locked door would change everything. And though terror whispered for her to turn back, curiosity urged her forward, stronger than fear, stronger than reason. And so, trembling but determined, Clara stepped into the shadows to finally uncover the truth. Clara's breath came in ragged gasps as she finally reached the end of the west wing, her fingers trembling as they closed around the heavy brass handle. The storm howled behind her, rain hammering the windows as if urging her onward. With a burst of courage, she flung the door open, her mind braced for horror, for the sight of some poor soul imprisoned, or perhaps something far darker. But what greeted her was nothing like the dreadful images she had conjured. Instead, the air smelled of dust and old wood, and the room beyond lay still and silent, a forgotten world wrapped in faded memories. Moonlight streamed through a cracked window, falling across covered furniture and trunks stacked neatly against the walls. Portraits hung crookedly, their painted eyes following Clara as she stepped inside, her heartbeat slowly settling into a confused rhythm. In one corner lay a small writing desk, Upon it, a stack of yellowed letters tied with a ribbon, the kind of ribbon that once might have been bright, but now was frayed and fragile. Clara felt a strange ache in her chest as she reached out to touch it. Behind her came a sharp gasp. She turned to find Edward standing in the doorway, his lantern casting a warm glow over his startled face. For a long moment, they stared at each other, both caught between guilt and confusion. Then Edward let out a weary sigh, the kind that seemed to come from somewhere deep within a person's soul. He motioned for her to sit and, in a voice heavy with sorrow, began to explain this, he said, was once the room of Lady Meredith's younger sister, a bright, lively girl who had brought laughter to the manor, until illness took her. Suddenly one winter, Lady Meredith, unable to face the constant reminder of her loss, had ordered the wing sealed. Yet she could not bear to let it fall into ruin. So each night a few loyal servants came quietly to dust and tend to it, whispering softly so as not to disturb the household. Clara sat very still as the truth washed over her fears melting into a tender sadness. She understood then how grief can twist into mystery when left in silence, how whispers in the dark are often nothing more than echoes of love and loss. The storm outside raged on, but within Clara there was only calm, a soft, aching calm that comes when secrets are finally laid to rest. As Edward's voice faded, she realized she had not uncovered a crime, but a story, one stitched delicately with sorrow and remembrance, and perhaps, in its own quiet way, forgiveness too. Clara felt her cheeks grow warm as Edward's words. The truth lay before her, clear and simple. Yet her heart still raced from the storm of her own imaginings. She had pictured such dreadful things, woven grand tales of deceit and hidden crimes, and now standing amidst nothing more than dust and memories, she felt both foolish and strangely light, like a bird released from a cage of its own making. When they returned to the sitting room, Lady Meredith sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red from weeping yet filled with grace. Clara knelt beside her and poured out her apology, her voice trembling with shame and sincerity. Lady Meredith, gentle as ever, cupped Clara's face and whispered that there was nothing to forgive. Grief, she said, is a private thing, and sometimes its silence can speak louder than words. Clara's heart ached at those words, for they rang with a truth she had never before understood. Edward, ever the steady one, broke the heaviness with a soft chuckle, teasing Clara about her wild theories, asking whether she had expected to find pirates hidden in the West Wing, or perhaps a secret treasure buried beneath the floorboards. Clara laughed through her tears, the sound mingling with his until the room felt lighter. Laughter, she realized, had a way of sweeping out shadows far better than suspicion ever could. As the evening wore on, Clara sat quietly, her thoughts wandering. She remembered all the mystery stories she had devoured late into the night. How thrilling it had been to imagine dark plots and twisted villains. Yet, real life, she now understood, was often simpler and far more tender. People did not always hide wickedness behind closed doors. Sometimes they hid their pain, their memories, their fragile hearts that could not bear to be seen. Clara felt humbled by the lesson. She had judged too quickly, seen only through the lens of her own imagination. She realized that everyone carries unseen burdens, and that love and understanding are the keys to truly seeing one another, though she still felt a touch of embarrassment. Gratitude bloomed within her, gratitude for the storm that had passed, for the laughter that followed, and for the quiet wisdom that would guide her in the days to come. As the fire crackled and the manor settled into peaceful silence, Clara knew she would never forget this night or the truths it had gently revealed. The morning of Clara's departure dawned soft and misty, the kind of morning that makes the heart ache with a sweetness it cannot quite name. The manor stood quiet and calm after all its storms, its windows glowing faintly in the pale light. Clara walked through its grand halls one last time, her fingers brushing against the velvet drapes and polished banisters, each step carrying a memory, each corner whispering a story. Where once she had felt fear and suspicion, now she felt only warmth, as if the house itself was bidding her farewell with a gentle sigh. Lady Meredith waited for her in the drawing room, her figure graceful against the glow of the fire. She embraced Clara with a tenderness that spoke of bonds formed in silence rather than words. Clara thanked her for her kindness, for opening both her home and her heart. Lady Meredith smiled with misty eyes and told Clara that she had brought a light back into these old walls, a light they had not known in many years. Clara's throat tightened at those words, realizing how deeply grief had shadowed this place, and how even her clumsy curiosity had managed to bring some healing. Edward appeared in the doorway, his usual composure softened by a hint of sadness. He insisted on walking her to the carriage himself, their steps slow, lingering, neither wanting to reach the gates too soon. Along the path lined with autumn leaves, Edward spoke in his quiet way, telling her that the manor would always hold a place for her, that not all doors were meant to be locked forever. Clara understood the weight behind his words and promised she would return one day, perhaps when the flowers bloomed again in spring. As the carriage wheels began to turn, Clara looked back at the manor, its towers rising into the mist like a dream fading with the dawn. She felt no trace of the fear that had gripped her when she first arrived, only a deep peace and a spark of excitement, for she now carried within her not just memories but inspiration. She imagined herself writing her own story, not of ghosts or darkened wings, but of people and the secret chambers of their hearts. She smiled as the road stretched out before her, knowing that this was not an ending at all, but a beginning, a new chapter yet to be written, and somewhere behind her, in the quiet halls of Ashford Manor, the echoes of her laughter and wonder would remain, like a lantern left glowing in the dark, a promise that she would one day return, and perhaps, just perhaps, find another mystery waiting for her in the warmth of that beloved home.